Dr. Amy Morgan had seen it all in her 15 years as a veterinarian on Station Harmony. Six-legged Vorthen hounds that could phase through solid matter when stressed. Crystalline Zephyrian songbirds, whose melodies could shatter windows if they got excited. Even a Kraxon battle slug that turned out to be surprisingly affectionate. Once you figured out that its acidic slime was actually its way of giving kisses. But the creature sitting on her examination table this Tuesday morning was something else entirely. So, Amy said, adjusting her glasses and trying to keep her voice professional, "You're telling me this is a pet?" The small, furry alien standing beside the table a Caltharian, judging by the distinctive blue-tinted skin and 4 arms nodded. Nervously. "Yes, Dr. Morgan, this is Pip. He's very special to my employer." Amy looked down at Pip. The creature was roughly the size of a house cat, covered in what appeared to be scales that shifted color like an oil slick. It had too many eyes, at least 8 that she could count, and what looked like tiny wings. That seemed far too small for flight. Most unnervingly, it was humming. Not making noise, actually humming a complex harmony with itself. "And your employer is preferentially anonymous," the Caltharian said quickly, "but very, very important. And very, very concerned about Pip's well-being." Amy had learned not to ask too many questions about her patient's owners. Station Harmony was a neutral port, which meant it attracted all sorts from legitimate traders, to smugglers to refugees, to beings who preferred their business remain their own. As long as the credits transferred and the animals got proper care, she kept her curiosity in check. "All right then," she said, pulling on her examination gloves. "What seems to be the problem? Pip hasn't been eating or sleeping, and he won't stop making that sound." Amy listened to the creature's complex humming. It was actually quite beautiful, like a choir of tiny voices weaving together in perfect harmony. "How long has this been going on?" 3 days. "My employer is ... concerned. Very concerned." The way the Caltharian emphasized very made Amy wondered just how concerned she should be about disappointing this mysterious employer. But that was a worry for later. Right now, she had a patient to examine. "Okay, Pip," she said softly, reaching out slowly with one hand. "Let's see what's going on with you." The moment her fingers touched Pip's scales, everything changed. Humming stopped. All 8 eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And then, impossibly, she could have sworn she heard a voice in her head, not words. Exactly, but something like relief mixed with desperate hope. Amy pulled her hand back, startled. Did anyone else feel that?" The Caltharian looked confused. "Feel what, doctor?" Before Amy could answer, Pip did something that made her question everything she thought she knew about xenobiology. The creature's scales shifted to a warm golden color, and those tiny, useless-looking wings spread wide. Not to fly, Amy could see they were far too small for that, but in what was unmistakably a display of trust. And then Pip began to purr. Amy had never heard anything like it. The sound wasn't just auditory. It seemed to resonate through her bones, making her feel inexplicably calm and ... happy. Not artificially happy, but the kind of deep contentment she remembered from childhood, sitting in her grandmother's garden on summer afternoons. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh, you poor thing. You're lonely, aren't you?" The Caltharian blinked in surprise. "Lonely? But Pip is very well cared for. He has the finest habitat, the best nutrition." "That's not the same thing," Amy said, her hands moving instinctively to examine Pip more thoroughly. The creature leaned into her touch, and she could feel that strange, not quite telepathic connection growing stronger. "He's a social creature, highly social, and he's been isolated. But that's impossible. Pip's species is believed to be solitary." "Believed by who?" Amy asked, running her fingers along Pip's spine and feeling the creature practically melt under her touch. And based on what evidence? The Caltharian paused. The Imperial Xenobiologists determined. Imperial Xenobiologists study from a distance, Amy interrupted gently. They don't do what I do. And what is that? Amy smiled, feeling Pip's purring intensify as she found a particularly itchy spot behind what might have been ears. I listen to what the animals tell me. Over the next hour, Amy performed the most thorough examination of her career. Not because Pip was particularly complex, though the creature's anatomy was fascinatingly intricate, but because every touch seemed to reveal new layers of information. It wasn't telepathy, exactly. Amy had encountered truly telepathic species before, and this was different. It was more like ... empathy, amplified. When she touched Pip, she could feel echoes of the creature's emotional state, and what she felt broke her heart. Loneliness so profound it was like a physical ache. Confusion about why the singing, that beautiful, complex humming, went unanswered. A desperate need for connection that went far beyond simple social interaction. Your employer, Amy said carefully as she checked Pip's respiratory system. Where did they acquire Pip? The Caltharian shifted uncomfortably. I believe Pip was gifted, a rare specimen from the Andromeda sector. Gifted by who? I cannot say. Amy nodded, focusing on Pip's reaction to different stimuli. The creature's scales shifted colors, with its mood gold for contentment, silver for curiosity, a deep blue that seemed to indicate sadness or worry. Right now, they were a warm amber, suggesting Pip was more relaxed than he'd been in days. Tell me about Pip's habitat, she said. Only the finest. A biodome that recreates his native environment perfectly. Temperature controlled, humidity regulated. The exact mineral composition of his homeworld soil. Is he alone in this habitat? Well, ... yes, of course. We wouldn't want to introduce potentially harmful variables. Variables, Amy repeated flatly. You mean other living creatures. It's for Pip's safety. It's killing him. The words came out harsher than Amy intended, but she could feel Pip's emotional state shifting as they talked about his living situation. The warm amber of his scales was darkening toward that sad blue. Dr. Morgan, the Caltharian said carefully, I appreciate your concern, but surely you're not suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything yet, Amy said. I'm still gathering information, but I can tell you right now that Pip isn't sick in any traditional sense. He's suffering from profound social isolation. His species, whatever they really are, appear to be highly empathic and intensely social. Keeping him alone is like keeping a human in solitary confinement. The Caltharian's four arms gestured in what Amy recognized as distress, but the Imperial Xenobiologists clearly stated that Pip's species are solitary creatures. The reports were very specific. Were these reports based on direct observation of the species in their natural habitat, or on theoretical analysis of limited specimens? The silence that followed told Amy everything she needed to know. I see, she said. Well, let me ask you this. Has Pip ever been around others of his kind? No, but then how would anyone know if they're truly solitary or not? Amy continued her examination, but her mind was racing. She'd seen this before: species mischaracterized due to limited study, creatures suffering because someone made assumptions based on incomplete data. The galaxy was full of beings who thought they were doing the right thing while causing immeasurable harm through ignorance. But this case felt different. The care and expense that had clearly gone into Pip's physical needs suggested someone who genuinely wanted the creature to be well. And the Caltharian's obvious nervousness indicated that disappointing the mysterious employer would be ... problematic. Doctor, the Caltharian said quietly, if you're correct about Pip's needs, What would you recommend? Amy looked down at Pip, who was now a soft, contented gold and purring steadily as she checked his wing structure. Ideally, find others of his species for him to socialize with. But failing that, she paused, thinking, he needs social interaction, regular, meaningful contact with other empathic beings. Not just caretakers doing their job, but genuine companionship. That would be ... difficult to arrange. I understand. But the alternative is watching Pip waste away from loneliness. His physical symptoms, the loss of appetite, the sleep disruption, they're all manifestations of emotional distress. Fix the emotional problem, and the physical symptoms will resolve. Amy finished her examination and began making notes in her medical pad. I'm going to recommend a course of treatment, but it's going to require significant changes to how Pip is cared for. The Keltharian's skin shifted to a paler blue, indicating anxiety. My employer will want specifics. Then here's what Pip needs, Amy said, ticking off points on her fingers. First, daily interaction with empathically sensitive beings. Not just feeding or basic care, but actual social engagement. Play, physical contact, communication attempts. Second, environmental enrichment. Not just a perfect replica of his homeworld, but stimulation, variety, things to explore and investigate. Third, and most importantly, he needs to be around others who can respond to his empathic projections. That humming isn't just noise, it's communication. He's been trying to talk, and no one's been answering. The Keltharian was frantically making notes on his own device. And if these needs cannot be met, Amy looked down at Pip, whose scales had shifted to that sad blue as the conversation turned serious. Then you'll lose him. Maybe not immediately, but creatures who are as social as Pip don't survive prolonged isolation. They just ... give up. The weight of that statement seemed to hit the Keltharian hard. I must contact my employer immediately. They will want to know of your recommendations. Of course, but in the meantime, Amy gently scratched behind Pip's head ears, and the creature's purring intensified. Would it be possible for Pip to stay here for a few days, for observation and treatment? I don't know. My employer is very protective of Pip. I understand. But I think Pip could benefit from being around other creatures for a while. Not just for medical reasons, but for his emotional well-being. My clinic has several other empathic species as patients. With proper supervision, Pip could have some much-needed social interaction while we develop a long-term care plan. Amy could see the internal struggle on the Keltharian's face. Clearly, he wanted to help Pip, but he was also terrified of making a decision his employer might disapprove of. Let me make this easier for you, Amy said. Tell your employer that I'm recommending a 3-day observation period for comprehensive behavioral analysis. During this time, Pip will be monitored around the clock to determine the exact nature and extent of his social needs. This isn't unusual for complex cases involving rare species. Relief flooded the Keltharian's features. Yes, that sounds ... medical, professional. My employer appreciates thoroughness. Excellent. I'll prepare a detailed treatment plan and preliminary report for your employer's review. Amy turned back to Pip, who had been listening to the entire conversation with obvious interest. What do you say, Pip? Ready to make some new friends? Pip's response was immediate and unmistakable. His scales shifted to the brightest gold Amy had seen yet. His tiny wings spread wide, and his purring became so intense that it seemed to fill the entire examination room with warmth and joy. For the first time in days, Pip's song had harmony. Spread fast through Station Harmony's diverse community that Dr. Morgan's clinic had acquired a new patient of unusual empathic sensitivity. By the 3rd day of Pip's stay, Amy's waiting room looked like a xenobiological convention. There was Mrs. Veterinarian, An elderly Crystallian whose pet rockworm could apparently sense emotional disturbances from 3 sectors away and had been agitated ever since Pip's arrival. The G twins brought their juvenile star dancer, a creature that looked like living aurora and communicated through color shifts, remarkably similar to Pip's scale changes. Even crotchy old Captain Moss showed up with Shiver, his supposedly vicious ice cat that had been uncharacteristically friendly since Pip's presence made itself known. It's like he's sending out some kind of empathic beacon, Amy explained to her assistant, Marcus, as they watched Pip interact with a group of creatures in the clinic's socialization room. He's not just social, he's a natural empathic facilitator. Look at how he's got them all communicating. The scene in the socialization room was unlike anything Amy had ever witnessed. Pip sat in the center of a loose circle of alien creatures, his scales cycling through gentle patterns of gold and silver. The star dancer hovered nearby, its colors matching Pip's emotional palette. The rockworm had emerged from its shell for the first time in months, apparently drawn by Pip's contentment. Even Shiver the ice cat was purring a sound Marcus swore. The creature had never made before. It's like they're all happier, Marcus observed, just being around him. Amy nodded, making notes in her treatment log. Pip's species, whatever they actually are, they might be natural emotional regulators, empathic stabilizers. No wonder he was suffering in isolation. It would be like cutting off a human's ability to speak, and then wondering why they were distressed. Doc, Marcus said quietly, there's something you should know. That Caltharian who brought Pip, he's been asking around the station, quietly but persistently, about you. Amy looked up from her notes. About me? What kind of questions? Professional background, training, where you learned xenobiology, how long you've been practicing, whether you've ever worked with, high profile, clients. A chill ran down Amy's spine. She'd been so focused on Pip's needs that she hadn't really considered the implications of treating a pet belonging to someone important enough to make a Caltharian nervous. Any idea who his employer actually is? No, but Marcus glanced around to make sure they weren't overheard. Captain Vex mentioned seeing some interesting ships docked in the restricted bays. Military configuration, but no identifying marks. And station security has been more attentive than usual. Before Amy could respond, the clinic's front door chimed and the Caltharian entered. But he wasn't alone. Following him were 6 individuals in elaborate robes that managed to be both elegant and somehow intimidating. Their faces were hidden by ornate masks, but Amy could tell from their varied heights and gaits that they represented multiple species. They moved with a kind of coordinated precision that suggested either military training or ceremonial importance. Both, Dr. Morgan, the Caltharian said, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. My employer has come to discuss Pip's treatment personally. Amy's mouth went dry. I, of course. Would your employer prefer to speak in private? One of the robed figures stepped forward. When they spoke, Amy realized 2 things immediately. First, that the voice belonged to a female of some species she couldn't immediately identify. And second, that this person was accustomed to being obeyed without question. Dr. Morgan, we have reviewed your treatment recommendations for the creature designated Pip. We find them intriguing. Thank you, Amy managed. Pip is responding very well to increased social interaction. His appetite has returned. He's sleeping normally, and his empathic projections have stabilized significantly. Yes, we have observed this. The figure's mask turned toward the socialization room, where Pip was still facilitating what could only be described as an interspecies therapy session. We were not aware that Pip possessed such capabilities. Amy felt like she was walking through a minefield, but her professional instincts kicked in. Empathic regulation is not uncommon among highly social species. What's unusual about Pip is the strength and precision of his abilities. In my professional opinion, members of his species likely serve as emotional anchors for their communities. Isolating one would be catastrophic, both for the individual and for the community they're meant to support. The silence that followed was so complete that Amy could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, another of the robed figures spoke this voice deeper, carrying what sounded like multiple harmonics. You speak of Pip's species as if you know what it is. Amy realized she'd just stepped into very dangerous territory. I don't know the specific taxonomical classification, but based on his behavioral patterns and empathic abilities, I can make educated guesses about his evolutionary background and social needs. Educated guesses? The first figure repeated. Based on what expertise? 15 years of veterinary. Practice with empathic species. Graduate studies in comparative xenobiology. And Amy took a deep breath, knowing she was about to reveal something she'd kept private for years. Personal experience with empathic abilities. Marcus shot her. A look of surprise. It was the first time Amy had ever mentioned her own empathic sensitivity to anyone at the clinic. She'd learned early in her career that admitting to empathic abilities often made both colleagues and clients uncomfortable. But watching Pip's transformation over the past 3 days, feeling the echo of his joy when he was finally able to connect with other creatures, had reminded Amy why she'd become a veterinarian in the first place. Some things were more important than professional comfort. You are empathic, the first figure said. It wasn't a question, mildly. Common enough among humans, though we don't usually discuss it openly. It's part of why I specialize in treating empathic species. I can sense their emotional states directly, which helps with diagnosis and treatment. Another long silence. Amy was beginning to wonder if she just made a career-ending mistake when the first figure spoke again. Show us. I'm sorry? Demonstrate your empathic connection with Pip. Amy glanced at Marcus, who looked as confused as she felt. It's not really something you can observe from the outside. It's more like ... feeling, an echo of his emotional state. Then describe what you feel. Amy looked toward the socialization room where Pip was still surrounded by his new friends. Without the visual cue of his color-shifting scales, she focused on the empathic impression he projected. Contentment, she said quietly. Deep satisfaction at being understood and accepted. Joy at finally being able to communicate effectively with other beings. And she paused, catching something else in the empathic background. Concern. He's worried about something. About going back to isolation? She looked up to see several of the robed figures exchange glances. Pip understands more than anyone realized, Amy continued. He knows this is temporary. He's happy now, but he's afraid of losing this connection again. And what would you recommend to address this concern? Amy realized this was probably the most important question of her career. Not just for Pip, but potentially for her own future. Pip needs a permanent social environment, she said firmly. Not occasional visits or scheduled interaction times, but genuine community. He needs to be around other empathic beings who can respond to his communication attempts and benefit from his emotional regulation abilities. Ideally, he'd be returned to others of his own species, but if that's not possible, a carefully selected group of empathically compatible companions could meet his needs. And if such an arrangement were politically complicated, the question confirmed Amy's growing suspicion that Pip's situation involved more than just a wealthy pet owner's preferences. Then the political complications need to be weighed against Pip's fundamental needs, she said. He's not a decoration or a status symbol. He's a sentient being with specific requirements for emotional and social well-being. Ignoring those needs isn't just cruel, it's ultimately counterproductive. A Pip who's emotionally healthy and socially fulfilled will be better able to fulfill whatever purpose he serves in his owner's life. Another exchange of glances among the robed figures. Then the first figure stepped closer to Amy. "Dr. Morgan, we have a proposition for you." The proposition, as it turned out, was both simpler and more complicated than Amy could have imagined. "You will come with us," the lead figure explained as they sat in Amy's office after hours, with only Marcus and the Keltharian present. The other robed figures had positioned themselves around the clinic with the casual alertness of professional bodyguards. "Pip requires ongoing care from someone who understands his needs. You have demonstrated both the expertise and the empathic sensitivity necessary for this task." Amy felt like she was trying to breathe underwater. "You want me to leave my practice here, my life, to become Pip's? What personal veterinarian? Among other things, yes. I can't just abandon my patients here. I have responsibilities." "Which will be assumed by a qualified colleague," the figure interrupted. "Dr. Kreshtar of the Andromedian Veterinary Institute has already agreed to take over your practice. Your current patients will receive excellent care." Amy stared. You? You already arranged for my replacement?" Before even asking if I'd agree, "We prefer to be prepared for all contingencies." The casual presumption of her compliance should have been infuriating. Instead, Amy found herself oddly impressed by the thoroughness of the planning. Whoever these people were, they were serious about Pip's care. "What exactly would this position involve?" she asked. "Pip's health and well-being would be your primary responsibility. You would also serve as advisor on matters relating to empathic species welfare. You would have access to resources and information unavailable to civilian practitioners. And if I refuse?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long. "Dr. Morgan," the figure said finally, "Pip has shown more improvement in 3 days under your care than in the previous 6 months combined. His well-being has become a matter of significant importance. We would prefer your willing cooperation, but Pip's needs must be met regardless." The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Amy looked through the office window at the socialization room where Pip was still surrounded by his new friends, his scales a warm gold in the soft lighting. "Can I ask who I'd be working for?" That information would be provided on a need-to-know basis. Amy rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. "This is insane. You can't just kidnap a veterinarian because your pet needs social interaction." "We are not kidnapping anyone," the figure said smoothly. "We are offering employment. Extremely well-compensated employment, with benefits that include access to xenobiological resources that most researchers only dream of." "And if the job doesn't work out? If I want to leave?" Another pause. "That would depend on the circumstances." Amy looked at Marcus, whose expression was carefully neutral. She knew he was trying not to influence her decision, but she could read the concern in his eyes. "I need time to think about this." "Of course, you have until tomorrow morning." The figure stood to leave, then paused. "Dr. Morgan, you should know that Pip is not our only concern. There are other creatures in our care who have similar needs. Creatures who have suffered from the same misunderstandings and inadequate care that Pip experienced. Your expertise could help many beings." After the mysterious delegation left, Amy and Marcus sat in silence for several minutes. Through the window, they could see Pip finally settling down for sleep, surrounded by his new friends in what looked like a multi-species cuddle pile. "What do you think I should do?" Amy asked finally. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I think you already know what you're going to do. The question is whether you're ready to admit it to yourself." Amy sighed. "It's crazy. I don't know who these people are, what I'd really be getting into, or if I'd ever be able to come back. But Pip needs help, and apparently so do others like him. And I might be the only person in this sector with the right combination of skills and empathic sensitivity to provide that help. Sounds like you've made your decision. Amy looked at Pip again, noting how his presence had transformed not just his own well-being, but that of every creature around him. I became a veterinarian to help animals that couldn't help themselves, to speak for beings who had no voice in their own care. How is this different? It's not, Marcus said gently. It's just bigger, and probably more dangerous. Probably. Amy stood up and walked to the window. Marcus, would you be willing to come with me? Marcus blinked in surprise. What? If I'm going to take care of multiple empathic species, I'll need help. Good help. You've been with me for 5 years. You know my methods. And you're one of the few people who isn't fazed by unusual alien biology. Amy ... These people, whoever they are, they might not want. Then they can find someone else to be Pip's veterinarian, Amy said firmly. I work with a team I trust, or I don't work at all. If they really need my expertise, they'll accept my conditions. Marcus grinned. In that case, absolutely. This job was getting boring anyway. Amy laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. Boring? Last month you helped me perform surgery on a 6-dimensional creature that existed in multiple phases of reality simultaneously. Like I said, boring. They spent the rest of the evening making preparations, just in case. Amy compiled her medical notes and treatment protocols, organized her research files, and prepared detailed care instructions for Dr. Krishdar. If she was really going to do this, she wanted to make sure her current patients would be properly looked after. But as she worked, her mind kept returning to something the lead figure had said. There are other creatures in our care who have similar needs. How many other beings were suffering from the same kind of well-intentioned but harmful care that Pip had endured? How many empathic species had been mischaracterized, isolated, or mistreated because their true needs weren't understood? Amy had always believed that every creature deserved proper care, regardless of how exotic or challenging they might be. If there was a chance to help not just Pip but others like him, how could she refuse? The next morning, she had her answer ready. The transport ship was unlike anything Amy had ever seen. It was elegant where military vessels were utilitarian, graceful where civilian ships were simply functional. Every surface seemed to incorporate both advanced technology and artistic beauty, creating an environment that was simultaneously impressive and somehow welcoming. Amy and Marcus were given comfortable quarters and told that the journey to their destination would take several days. Pip had been moved to a spacious compartment filled with various empathic creatures who served as companions for the ship's crew. For the first time since Amy had met him, Pip seemed completely at ease. On the second day of travel, Amy was summoned to meet with the mysterious employer she'd agreed to work for. The conference room was even more elegant than the rest of the ship, with large viewports showing the swirling colors of hyperspace. Seated at the head of a polished table was a figure Amy recognized from her history studies, though she'd never expected to see him in person. Emperor Valdris Cathmoran, ruler of the Andromedian Empire, looked exactly as imposing as his official portrait suggested. His species, the Kethani, were tall, graceful beings with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to naturally convey both intelligence and authority. His skin had the characteristic silver-blue hue of his people, and his dark eyes held the weight of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected billions of lives. Amy's first thought was that she was in way over her head. Her second thought was that now she understood why the Caltharian had been so nervous. Dr. Morgan, the Emperor said, his voice carrying the harmonics she'd heard from one of the robed figures. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Amy took the indicated chair, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Your Imperial Majesty, I have to say, this is not what I expected when I agreed to treat an unusual pet. Emperor Cathmoran smiled an expression that transformed his austere features into something surprisingly warm. Pip is hardly a pet, Dr. Morgan, though I understand why you might have formed that impression. Then what is he? He is what your people might call a therapy animal, though that term hardly captures the complexity of his role. Pip is a harmonizer, a member of his species. It serves as empathic stabilizers for high-stress environments. They are invaluable for beings in positions of extreme responsibility. Amy felt pieces clicking into place. The isolation wasn't intentional cruelty. You were trying to protect him. Yes, but as you so correctly identified, we were protecting him from the very thing he needed, most social interaction and empathic connection. It was a well-intentioned mistake that nearly cost Pip his life. How did you acquire him? The Emperor's expression grew somber. Pip's homeworld was destroyed in the Sector's War 15 years ago. He was one of only 12 survivors of his species that we were able to rescue. The others. He paused. The others did not survive the trauma of displacement and loss. Amy felt her heart clench. He's the last of his kind? As far as we know, yes. Which makes your success in treating him all the more remarkable and necessary. Your Imperial Majesty, if Pip is the last of his species, how can I provide him with the social environment he needs? I can surround him with other empathic creatures, but it's not the same as being with his own kind. That, Dr. Morgan, is precisely why we need your expertise. Pip cannot be given what he needs from his own species, but perhaps with the right care and understanding, he can find a different kind of family. A chosen family that can provide the emotional connection he requires. Amy thought about the scene in her clinic's socialization room. The way Pip had naturally brought together creatures from different species and facilitated communication between them. He's already doing that, isn't he? Creating his own kind of family. Indeed. And under your care, he has begun to thrive in a way we had not thought possible. The Emperor leaned forward. Dr. Morgan, I must be direct with you about why your services are so desperately needed. Pip is not the only survivor of the war who requires specialized care. We have rescued dozens of beings from destroyed worlds, many of them the last remnants of their species. Most have been provided with appropriate care based on our best understanding of their needs. But some, like Pip, have requirements that we have failed to properly identify. Amy felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. You want me to evaluate and treat other potential refugees? I want you to help me save lives, Dr. Morgan. The Empire is vast, and while we have resources beyond imagination, we lack something you possess: the combination of empathic sensitivity and practical experience that allows you to truly understand what these creatures need. Amy was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Your Imperial Majesty, can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you care so much about individual animals? I mean, you rule an empire. Surely there are more pressing concerns than one lonely creature, even if he is the last of his kind? Emperor Kethmorin was silent for so long that Amy began to worry she'd overstepped. Finally, he spoke. Do you know what my species' greatest weakness is, Dr. Morgan? No, sir. Isolation. Kethani are naturally solitary, preferring logic and order to emotional complexity. It serves us well in many ways. We are excellent administrators, strategic thinkers, long-term planners. But it also makes us ... cold, disconnected from the emotional realities of the beings we govern. He stood and walked to the viewport, gazing out at the swirling colors of hyperspace. When I first acquired Pip, it was for practical reasons. The stress of Imperial leadership was affecting my health and decision-making abilities. My advisors suggested that an empathic companion might provide emotional stability. I agreed because it seemed ... efficient. Amy waited, sensing there was more to the story. What I did not expect the Emperor continued, was how Pip would change my understanding of what it means to truly care for another being. Through him, I began to comprehend the emotional cost of the isolation I had imposed, not just on myself, but on the creatures in my care who had already lost everything else. He turned back to Amy. Pip taught me that survival is not enough. That preserving life without preserving the meaning and connection that makes life worth living is a form of cruelty I had never considered. I cannot undo the mistakes that were made with the other survivors, but I can ensure they do not continue. Amy felt a new level of respect for the Emperor. She'd expected a powerful ruler who saw Pip as a useful tool. Instead, she was discovering someone who had learned empathy from his empathic companion and was genuinely committed to doing better. I'll need to see the other survivors, she said. Assess their current conditions and care requirements. Of course. We will begin as soon as we reach the Imperial Preserve. Imperial Preserve? Emperor Kethmorin smiled. Home, Dr. Morgan. At least for now. A place where beings who have lost their own worlds can find safety, purpose, and perhaps even happiness. With your help, I intend to make sure that promise is kept. The Imperial Preserve was nothing like Amy had imagined. Rather than a sterile collection of enclosures, it was a sprawling complex of interconnected biodomes, each designed to recreate the natural habitat of different species. But what struck Amy most was the care that had gone into making the environments feel alive, not just scientifically accurate. Gardens bloomed with impossible combinations of flora from dozens of worlds. Streams wound through crystalline formations that sang in harmonious tones. Artificial suns provided warmth and light calibrated to the needs of creatures whose home stars had been extinguished. There are currently 43 survivors in residence. Emperor Kethmorin explained as they walked along elevated pathways that allowed observation without intrusion. Some are the last of their species, like Pip. Others are small groups, families, pairs, or pods that managed to stay together during the evacuation. Amy watched a creature that looked like a living rainbow drift through what appeared to be a cloud forest. In another dome, something resembling a cross between a giant butterfly and a jellyfish floated serenely in a zero-gravity environment. Each habitat was beautiful, technically perfect, and utterly lonely. How many are showing signs of distress similar to what Pip experienced? 7 that we've identified. Possibly more that have learned to hide their symptoms. Amy stopped walking. Hide their symptoms? Dr. Morgan, these beings have lost everything: their worlds, their families, often their entire species. They are utterly dependent on Imperial care for survival. Some have learned that displaying distress leads to increased isolation for their own protection. They suffer in silence rather than risk being further separated from any companionship they might have found. The weight of responsibility Amy had felt in the conference room doubled. These weren't just medical cases. They were traumatized refugees who had learned that asking for help could make their situation worse. I'll need to see all of them, she said, but carefully. If they're hiding distress, a direct medical examination might seem threatening. I'll need time to observe, to earn their trust. Time you shall have. But first, there is someone I would like you to meet. They took a transport pod to the far side of the complex, where a smaller collection of domes housed what appeared to be the preserve's administrative and residential areas. Emperor Kethmorin led Amy to a modest dwelling that seemed designed for someone much smaller than himself. Keeper Solace, he called. I've brought the specialist we discussed. The being who emerged from the dwelling was unlike any species Amy had encountered. Roughly humanoid in shape, but covered in soft, downy feathers that shifted color with her movements. She stood barely 4 feet tall, but radiated an aura of calm competence that reminded Amy of the best nurses she'd ever worked with. Dr. Morgan, Keeper Solace said, her voice carrying multiple harmonics like a wind chime. "I have been eager to meet you. Your success with Pip has given us hope. Keeper Solace oversees the day-to-day care of our residents," the Emperor explained. She has been advocating for changes in our protocols for some time, but lacked the specific expertise to implement them. Amy shook the Keeper's hand, noting the way the feathered being's colors shifted to warm golds and greens, colors that felt somehow welcoming. "What can you tell me about the residents who might be suffering?" "Come," Solace said. "I will show you. But we must be subtle. Some of them have become quite skilled at pretending wellness when they sense observation." Over the next several hours, Amy received an education in the complexity of interspecies trauma care. Each case was unique, but patterns emerged. Social. Species isolated for their protection. Creatures with complex communication needs, surrounded by caretakers who couldn't understand their attempts at contact. Beings whose emotional or psychological requirements had been overlooked in favor of meeting their basic physical needs. "This one," Solace said quietly, as they observed a dome where a creature that resembled a cross between a tree and a spider sat motionless at its center, "has not moved from that position in 6 months. We provide nutrients through soil absorption, maintain perfect atmospheric conditions, ensure optimal light spectrum. By all physical measures, she is healthy. But her species are storytellers. They communicate history, culture, and emotion, through complex vibrations in their root networks. In their natural habitat, they would be connected to dozens of others, sharing and receiving stories constantly. Here," Solace gestured at the solitary figure. "Here she has no one to talk to, and nothing new to learn. She is dying of boredom and loneliness, but so slowly that we almost didn't recognize it." Amy watched the tree spider creature, noting the dull coloration of her bark-like skin, the way her limbs drooped with what could only be described as despair. How long since she arrived? 3 years. She was quite animated initially, curious, exploratory, but as she realized she was alone, Solace's feathers shifted to muted blues and grays. She began to withdraw. We increased stimulation in her environment, provided more complex climbing structures, introduced various forms of entertainment technology. Nothing helped, because you are treating the symptoms, not the cause. She doesn't need more things to do. She needs someone to share experiences with, someone to tell her stories to. Amy was beginning to understand the scope of the problem. The Imperial Preserve was a masterpiece of physical care, but it had been designed by beings who, like the Emperor himself, didn't fully comprehend the social and emotional needs of highly empathic species. "Dr. Morgan," Emperor Kethmoran said, "what would you recommend?" Amy looked around at the beautiful, lonely habitats, thinking of Pip's transformation when he'd finally been allowed to interact with other creatures. "Integration," she said. "Not forced interaction, but opportunities for voluntary social contact between compatible species. Shared spaces where creatures can choose to interact or remain solitary as their needs dictate. But the risk of disease, transmission, behavioral conflicts, territorial disputes are manageable with proper protocols and supervision. The risk of emotional and psychological deterioration from prolonged isolation is demonstrably greater." Amy turned to face both the Emperor and Keeper Solace. "Your Imperial Majesty, you've created a beautiful sanctuary here. But sanctuary isn't just about safety from external threats. It's about creating an environment where beings can heal, grow, and find meaning in their lives again." Keeper Solace's feathers brightened considerably. "You speak of what I have felt but could not articulate. These beings need purpose, connection, hope for the future." "Exactly. And they need to feel that their own knowledge and experiences have value. Many of them are the last repositories of their species' cultures, histories, and wisdom. They're not just survivors to be preserved, their libraries of irreplaceable knowledge that could benefit the entire preserved community. Amy thought of the tree spider storyteller, sitting alone with centuries of stories that no one could hear. What if instead of isolating her, we created opportunities for her to share those stories? Other empathic species might not understand the specific cultural context, but they could appreciate the artistry, the emotion, the universal themes. A storytelling circle, Salas said, her feathers now cycling through excited patterns of gold and silver, with translation protocols to allow cross-species communication. And not just for entertainment, Amy added, structured social interaction. That serves multiple purposes: cultural preservation, emotional support, community building. Emperor Kethmorin was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the preserve. You propose to restructure the entire facility. I propose to evolve it, Amy corrected, from a collection of beautiful cages into a genuine community. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but the alternative is watching these irreplaceable beings slowly fade away, despite our best intentions. And you believe this approach will work? Amy thought of Pip, surrounded by his chosen family of empathic creatures, his scales bright with contentment as he facilitated communication between species that had never interacted before. I've already seen it work, Your Imperial Majesty, on a small scale with limited resources and time. Here, with your support and Keeper Solas's expertise, we could create something unprecedented, a true interspecies community where survivors of lost worlds could find not just survival, but belonging. The Emperor smiled, and for the first time since Amy had met him, he looked genuinely hopeful. Dr. Morgan, I believe you may be exactly what the Preserve has been waiting for. When can you begin? Amy looked out at the beautiful, lonely habitats, thinking of all the beings who were suffering in silence, and all the possibilities that lay ahead if they could get this right. Immediately, she said, but I want to start with Pip. He's already proving he can bring different species together. Let's see what happens when we give him a bigger stage to work with. Dr. Amy Morgan stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed community center, watching what could only be described as controlled chaos unfold in the main interaction space below. The tree spider storyteller, who had chosen the name, Weaver, sat at the center of a loose circle of creatures from 7 different species. Her root tendrils connected to a translation network that converted her vibrational stories into empathic impressions that any species could understand. Around her, beings who had never shared the same space before listened with rapt attention to tales of worlds that no longer existed. In one corner, Pip had established what Marcus jokingly called the therapy zone, a comfortable area where creatures could come for emotional regulation and empathic support. His scales shifted through gentle, soothing patterns as he helped a recently arrived refugee work through the trauma of displacement. Near the community garden, the rainbow creature Amy had first observed was teaching a group of young beings from various species how to paint with light, creating collaborative artworks that combined multiple sensory modalities. The mortality rate has dropped to 0, Keeper Solas reported, her feathers bright with satisfaction. More importantly, we've seen measurable improvements in psychological health across all residents. The integration protocols you developed have exceeded all expectations. Amy nodded, making notes on her datapad. What about the new arrivals? How are they adapting to the community structure? Better than we dared hope. Having established residents to welcome them, to share experiences of adaptation and healing. It makes all the difference. Marcus appeared at Amy's elbow, carrying a cup of her favorite tea. The Emperor wants to see you, he said. Something about expansion plans. Amy found Emperor Kethmorin in his private study, surrounded by holographic displays showing star maps and facility schematics. But what caught her attention was Pip, who was curled contentedly in a specially designed perch near the Emperor's desk, his scales a warm gold as he provided his unique form of emotional support. Dr. Morgan, the Emperor said, looking up from his displays. I have a proposition for you. Amy raised an eyebrow. Another one. Indeed. The success of the preserve's transformation has not gone unnoticed. 3 other sectors have requested similar facilities for their own displaced populations. I would like you to oversee the development of a network of integrated communities, a new model for refugee care that prioritizes emotional and psychological well-being alongside physical survival. Amy looked at Pip, whose color shifted to what she'd learned indicated curiosity and anticipation. That would be a massive undertaking. Yes, but also a chance to ensure that what we've learned here benefits survivors throughout the galaxy. No being should have to suffer in isolation simply because their needs are not understood. Amy thought of all the creatures downstairs, living proof that connection and community could heal even the deepest wounds. She thought of the stories yet to be shared, the friendships yet to be formed, the lives yet to be saved. I'll need a bigger team, she said finally, and complete autonomy in developing treatment protocols. Granted, and I want Pip to be part of the advisory council. He understands community integration better than any of us. Pip's scales brightened to brilliant gold, and his harmonious purr filled the room with contentment. Emperor Kethmorin smiled. I believe Pip approves of the arrangement. Amy reached over to scratch behind Pip's head ears, feeling the familiar warmth of empathic connection. 6 months ago, she'd been treating a lonely pet. Now she was part of a community that spanned species and sectors, united by the simple understanding that every being deserved connection, purpose, and hope. In that case, she said, let's get to work.